people don't. Yeah, I always found it kind of interesting. I mean, if it's just a
I
bunch of series of
hated
names and stuff.
history in high school, and it wasn't until I was an adult that I was like, oh.
It becomes more interesting for most people as you get into adulthood, but
I don't like this.
All right, we're beginning now, everybody.
typically in high school, most people, they've done surveys on it, most people do not like history. And I'll wait for these guys till they're done. Tell me when I can go.
Go. You're ready. Go for it.
Well, no, these guys here. Because
Oh,
they're
right.
conducting a side experiment, see,
Oh.
and so when you're finished, then we'll start, if that's okay with you. You just tell me when.
Sounds good.
Thank you. So this is going to be a little bit of history. I'll try not to bore you to tears, but we do have a few dates in there because the timeline becomes important on the way the medium changed. I know a couple of you saw some of this stuff last year, but it'll be a review and hopefully some of the stuff will be new. We've updated that a little bit. But if you'll notice, we're going to do a little history. If you can see that picture, can you tell what's going on there?
Constant.
There's one microphone. Those are all actors around one microphone. This is CBS, a big network back in, that's probably vintage 1930 something, probably. I mean, we're getting back like 90, 100 years ago almost. But you'll notice that what they're doing is a radio drama because there was no television yet. And so if you wanted to watch a TV show, you wouldn't watch it, you'd listen to it, right? That's what they're doing. Notice these guys here on the right, they're running the stuff. They do all the sound effects. They have actual pistols in the studio that they're shooting for gunshots. It's like a murder mystery or something like that. You know, they do the horse thing, you know. They get the clop things and everything, and they get sandpaper, and then they'll rattle tin and stuff to make it sound like there's a storm and everything. People got really, really innovative back in the day to be able to produce theater of the mind stuff because it was very, very rudimentary, but it was the history of what we started with and kind of where it was all going to head. Yes, ma'am.
Can anybody tell me the name of the person or the job of the person who's making those noises?
Sound maker.
The Foley.
Ollie artist.
Yep, there you are. Okay, so you may have heard of Guillermo Marconi, Nikola Tesla. Anybody heard of those guys? Tesla now makes a fine car. Marconi doesn't make a car. In 1894, so we're talking way back when. This is right at the end, or actually in the midst of the Industrial Revolution, when things are really changing. We came out of the Civil War. It was an agrarian society. People are migrating to the cities, reconstruction in the South, to rebuild the South after the war. And America and the world, but America leads it, becoming very innovative. And in that environment, they're testing things. I mean, things are just moving exponentially from a cart, horse, and buggy kind of a world to having automation and cars and all that kind of stuff in this environment. So they test all this stuff and they find out naturally there are waves in the air that can transmit through the air, through transmitters and receivers. The first radio broadcast actually happens in 1906. What they did was they were trying to guide ships from crashing into these huge rocks off the coast of Massachusetts in the Atlantic Ocean. So what they did, they put up a big transmitter, and rather than call each ship, the first broadcast was they put the word out to all of these ships at once from this radio tower they built near a lighthouse in Massachusetts. And that was back in 1906. Well, then the first commercial radio station goes on the air in 1920. Anyone know the name? KDKA in Pittsburgh was the very first commercial radio station in America. First TV broadcast, 1936, and now we're 16 years hence. Television, FM radio the next year, 1937. Color TV then doesn't come until 1950. All TV prior to that was black and white. And then transistor radios, 1954. You know why a transistor radio was important? Radios used to be about this tall, and it was cabinetry, and the family would gather around and tune in and listen to the radio, and people actually sat there and just listened to the radio in their living rooms. There were fireside chats given by Franklin Roosevelt during the war, and so people got updated from the president talking to them on the radio. Well, the transistor radio comes many years later. Now all of a sudden radio's portable. You can carry it in your pocket. It's kind of like a Walkman, which then transitioned into the iPad, or iPod actually at the time. And then that of course now is on everybody's phone and you carry it around. But transistor radio was actually like the very first iPod. Anybody here have an iPod or know one? Because you can't buy them anymore. I mean, they're really tough to find because everybody.
I brought it just to show off.
Oh, cool. Yeah, there's one. Because everybody has them on these now, right? So you don't really need separate devices. But that's kind of what a transistor radio did back in those days. So, television today, let's fast forward. Now there are almost 2,300 TV stations in the US. There's a lot of TV stations out there. That's UHF and VHF. And what that means is ultra high frequency and very high frequency. And those stations are the ones that, if you put the antenna up, you can get them out of the air, and now it's digital. Up until, was it, I don't remember, I think it was 2005, was it 05 that they were, I don't remember, they were required to broadcast digitally as opposed to analog waves. And the analog waves would get really weird, and you'd see, you know, the picture moving around, and you'd see static and all this weird stuff, and yet it was really hard to get good reception. Well then, when they digitized it, anybody here ever watch TV over the air? Like, to have an antenna, you can actually get it. It's not on cable. You can actually watch over the air. It's free. And you get typically an antenna that's about this size, looks like a notebook, or it's about the size of an iPad or something. And you plug it into your TV, and it pulls digital signals out of the air, because all those TV stations up on Cedar Hill, you know, where all the towers are. Have you seen all those big tall towers on Cedar Hill? Well, that's where most of the TV stations are. I mean, 11 and 5, and some of those guys are in Fort Worth, but most of them are up on the hill. Well, they're broadcasting in analog and digital. Well, if you pick up a digital signal, it's perfect. It's high def, it's pristine, but every once in a while you'll see it pixelate and get really weird, right? If the signal is weak, you can notice that. Well, that's a different kind of weakness than they used to have back in those days when it was a fuzzy picture, and they'd have a thing called rabbit ears. And they were antennas that stuck on the top of the TV, and people would go and adjust them and everything, try to get a better picture. Well, that's what UHF and VHF stations are. Anyone know what a translator is, a TV translator? There are 4,500 of them in the US, there's a lot of them. That is where you take a television, say for example, Channel 11, right? They take Channel 11 signal, and only that signal, and it rebroadcasts it. It's like a repeater, and it rebroadcasts it to a different area where there's not as good a coverage to extend their reach. And there are a lot of those out there. 87% of the US population watches television on a regular weekly basis. Do you think that number seems high to you or low to you?
High.
Seems high? Do you think fewer people watch TV?
Yeah.
But when you say TV, what do you mean by TV?
I mean anything except streaming. I mean over-the-air television. Whether it's sports, whether it's news, whether it's, you know, the goofy lineup of primetime shows that some major networks carry.
I think like the newer generation just streams everything.
Yeah, like
The newer generation just streams everything.
Well, yeah, most people stream, but I'm talking over the air. So that's a pretty high percentage, right? I mean, personally, like for example, I watch Netflix more than regular TV or
But that
documentaries
wouldn't,
or whatever.
Netflix is not in your 80%.
No, it is not. That is not included. This is television, broadcast, or television that will come over a cable system. But it's television stations. And so that's a lot of usage, really, when you think about it, right? And of course, there's internet streaming, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But you got the big three going on for ages, right? CBS, NBC, and ABC, the alphabet networks, and they control the universe from the mid-40s till about the mid-80s or so. And there are now more than 50 national over-the-air networks. The CW, you know, on and on it goes. You know, you get MyTV, the Game Show Network, you know, Comedy Central. These all are transmitted on the air as well as over cable systems around America. And of course, internet, and that's what we were just talking about. That's streaming. That's where people are watching Hulu or Amazon Prime or HBO or whatever they're watching. That's different. That is not in the 87% that we just talked about. Now, radio, on the other hand, there are over 15,000 radio stations on the air today. This is over-the-air broadcast radio stations. There's also satellite Sirius XM. Anybody have that in their car? Internet radio. That is becoming bigger because a lot of people will put that on at work and they can just listen in the background over their computer and their, you know, a desktop, laptop, whatever. 93% of Americans use radio on a weekly basis, actually more than watch television, which is really remarkable. And of course,
I would ask the kids that, because I've talked to the kids about radio. So, in this room, how many of you have listened to a radio, one of those things that he had just talked about in the last week? So then that's half of this room.
here's also another way that we used to do research, okay? The difference is you just said listen to, right? Which is a great way to phrase the question. Let me phrase it another